Today on Success Excuses podcast, we have the one and only Steve Harris, Managing Director of Integrity HSE. Based up in Aberdeen, Steve, welcome to the Success Excuses podcast.
I genuinely can't thank you enough for having me on, James. And I should introduce you now as being the one and only James Fleming, because I've heard so much about you and it has all been positive.
Well, I'm glad it's all positive. That's a good start. Yeah. That's a good start.
Well, one of the things that I heard most about you was that you have an infectious energy that's able to fill a room, and you haven't disappointed in any way whatsoever.
Well, let's see how the rest of the day goes.
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. Right, so where do I want to start? So first of all, tell me a little bit about your new business, because you've had a lot of real fast success, which is, by the way, very unusual, starting up a business. So let's start with it, and then we'll go back to the story. So let's talk about the Integrity HSE. Give me a wee background on it and why you started it.
Well, Integrity HSE is the culmination of years and years and decades of my own work. So I've had this comment before that your business has been really successful, really fast. And if you look at the wrapper of the business, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But what actually happened was I have spent years and years learning my trade, crafting my discipline, and then what I did was I started a business, but the business was started on my reputation. So people then understood that I was no longer hamstrung, so to speak, by an employer, that I could work for them 100%, and they loved it. So it took off really quite quickly. And then what I've had to concentrate on doing is taking a big step back from the business in terms of public facing, getting the business brand to step forward, because what I didn't want is for people to think, Integrity HSE, that's Steve Harris.
And they're getting you.
Yeah, exactly. But Integrity HSE is so much more than me.
Yes.
And very quickly I was able to bring on board my business partner, Darryl Lines, who's the operations director, who is just an incredible professional and person that I can trust completely, that sees the world.
It's a great feeling, isn't it?
It's amazing. Yeah. He doesn't see the world in the same way as me, but we align on the vision. And we align on what good looks like, but he's got a different perspective.
Love it.
Which is incredibly valuable. Yeah. And he is, he's 10 years younger than me. He is, in all honesty, probably brighter than me, probably nicer than me, probably better looking than me.
Great person to have in your business.
Yep, but he'll never be more experienced than me because I'm 10 years old, so I'm grabbing onto that for all it's worth. And one of the real reasons that I got incredibly passionate about Integrity HSE was my time with Lloyd's Register. So I have
Is this the why you're starting it?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
very much
I love it.
Yeah. So in Lloyd's Register, I was fortunate enough to head up their energy division in terms of HSE and risk management.
Sure.
What Lloyd's Register didn't realise, and a couple of other people that were sniffing around me, so to speak, to try and get me on board their teams didn't realise, was that my father was away at sea for 30 years. So it very much ran in the blood of the family, and he was so proud to be able to say that someone in his family worked for Lloyd's Register. I was always going to Lloyd's Register.
So Lloyd's Register, in his eyes, was the king of the crop. They were the top doggies, we'll call it.
Absolute epitome. I think when Dad was away at sea, I think when somebody from Lloyd's walked onto a vessel, everybody, from cook to captain, saluted and said, grab a rag, look busy, God is here.
Yeah,
so for Dad to think that, Lloyd's Register, then COVID came along, and as all organisations did, most of the big organisations anyway, they sold off the jewellery in order to finance the core.
Yep.
So the energy division of Lloyd's Register was divested. Now, when the energy division was in Lloyd's is owned by the Lloyd's Register Foundation, which means when I worked really hard and my team really excelled and we made lots of money for Lloyd's Register or supported other business lines that made lots of money, then it went to primary schools. It went to furthering understanding of safety at sea. It went to revolutionising things like confined space entry and things that really caused serious injury.
Yeah.
And we were so proud of that. But when we were divested down, we were picked up by private equity. Now, private equity, again,
I've got a smile on my face. I know where it's going.
Now, a lot of my friends work in private equity, and I'm pretty au fait with what happens in private equity, and I get it. I really do.
Absolutely.
However,
they're there to make money for their shareholders. End of.
100%. And there's a place for that. But we didn't then get the photographs from the primary schools and all the good initiatives. Yeah. So I thought I really loved that, having a purpose bigger than myself that me and my team could get behind. So I thought, I seem to be okay at what I'm doing. I get some really good feedback from clients. And I also know the people I like to use, but they're spread out throughout a number of different organizations. So why don't I go out on my own? And why don't I bring all the best people under one house? And unsurprisingly enough, from the small time that we've met each other, I was finding it harder and harder to keep my mouth closed or to phrase myself appropriately in senior rooms when I knew in my bones the wrong decisions were being made.
Yeah.
And you know what? Reflecting on that, it wasn't necessarily the wrong decisions. It just... my good looked different to their good. So they were making decisions to get to their good, which weren't the decisions I wanted to get to my good. Yeah. Anyway, so started Integrity HSE. All we want to do...
I want to, before you tell me that why, so what was the drive? So you knew that before, how you had this really social responsibility and these really good things happening, and then at some point you thought, okay, this is not aligning with my values.
Very much.
Was that the turning point, or was it you thought you could do it better? What was the why? What was that?
I knew I could do it better, and I knew I could make a positive influence on the world.
Love it.
So Integrity HSE, our entire purpose is to make the working world a safer, healthier, more sustainable place. It is not on financial metrics. It's genuinely not.
That's a vision, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And we do an awful lot of loss-leading things in order just to educate the world and clear the mists behind some really, really critical topics. So we held a conference where we invited along a load of our clients and a load of people that weren't our clients as well, because it is about education. And we did this last week, and we concentrated on neurodiversity. And we brought down a real expert. We paid for everything, for the venue, for lunch, for the whole shebang. And they came down and educated the people in the room about neurodiversity. You know, they reckon about 20% of the working population is neurodiverse. Yeah. And employers don't realise this. But what employers love talking about are things like mental health. Yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah, and they come and see us at Integrity HSE, and one of the first questions we ask them is, what's your neurodiversity strategy? And they say,
what?
I didn't realise. I mean, well, statistically, we've got 20% of your working population that we can really help really quickly. And if we don't do this... well, first of all, you may actually be breaking the law. Yeah. But next, if we make reasonable adjustments within the workplace, you are going to release a tidal wave of potential like you wouldn't believe. So your ROI on putting a quiet room in place or putting something in list as well as verbal when you're giving someone an instruction, your ROI on that's going to be 20 to 40 times. Absolutely. It's going to be huge.
Absolutely. So, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
But with Integrity HSE, I want to come back to something that we're so proud of. We walk our talk. It is incredibly important. And anyone that doesn't walk our talk doesn't work for Integrity HSE. We hire very, very slowly, and we fire very, very quickly. And we do that on character, and we do that on the values of the professional.
Love it.
What we do is... we invest an awful lot in junior sports as well. So we know for a fact that, for example, in Scotland, they say about 1 in 4 relationships are subject to domestic abuse. Yeah. Now, 1/3 of that is female on male. 2/3 of that is male on female. Yeah. I don't have the statistics for same-sex couples, but I'm imagining they'll either mirror or be round and about.
The same, yeah.
The point of the story is that some of these kids' home lives are incredibly difficult. So what we do is we sponsor a boys' football team in Dundee, a boys' rugby team in Aberdeen, girls' netball team in Aberdeenshire, girls' netball team in Aberdeen. And we do that because when they're in our sports teams, we know they're safe. We know they're learning good skills, they're socialising, learning on the pitch leadership, learning about healthy environments and everything that can bring. relatively speaking, we can feed them. We know that it's great. And I remember how important sports teams were for me when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I ended up reading this incredible study by Gallup that said 95% of senior female leaders today employ the skills that they learnt on the sports field as a junior.
Wow.
So if you want to develop leaders, and if you want to make the world a bit...
100%.
You invest in the kids.
Absolutely. Because it's that
that
resilience that they build,
Yeah.
isn't it? And that, I mean... Like, I've got a whole business around leadership development. I mean, we've created a movement around motivational intelligence, and the bottom line is resilience. I mean, that grit and resilience to keep, sticking true to your values. Where I'm loving sticking really true to your value. We talked about this off air about how important values are.
Oh.
I want to talk about that because I looked at your values on your website, and we've got very similar values. How did they come about? Because they're really powerful.
Yeah, and this isn't particularly fancy. The values are a reflection of me. It's quite simple, and my values are a reflection of my journey through life and what I've learned.
Yep.
So I'd love to be able to sit down and say, we followed this big corporate strategy where we had an away day and lots of really bright people that are consultants that charge huge down came down, and not at all. I sat down with a bit of paper when I started the company and said, what really means the world to me? And what I wanted values where I'm not a micromanager by any means whatsoever. What I do is I hire the right type of person. You can train the professional. I hire the right type of person, hopefully instill the competence within them, and then let them go to flourish. Yes. Some people need close quarter support. Some people just need a long leash and just to be said, Steve, let me go. But I didn't want anyone in the organisation to ever face a decision that they couldn't take at the time in front of that client or in front of the situation.
That's real leadership.
And what we say is, it doesn't matter what decision you're making, make it on the values, do what the values tell you to do, and we will 100% back you up.
Absolutely.
Now, don't get me wrong, when they get back to the office and it's a closed door, I may very well turn around and say, what on earth were you thinking? But
it met the value.
It met the value. But as long as they're following the values, then we will never really pick fault with them. And
me and my wife started our business together, and we did exactly the same. Seeing that very first business plan we put together when we were in Tenerife, sitting at the beach, we built our business plan and a business name, and we came up with our values, and we asked the questions: what is it that really matters to you? And then my wife would be, what really matters to you? And our values came from the things, when we look back to our career, I'm ex-oil and gas, and when I look back in my career and all the things that I really liked and the things that I really didn't like, and being in big corporates, and we built our values based on what matters, what really matters. Forget business, right? What really matters, right? And it's courage, it's potential, it's learning, and more importantly, authenticity.
100%.
And one of our authenticity statements is, have fun while you're doing it. Enjoy the process and enjoy the ride. Because I would hate, I would hate to get to the end of my life. I know this is we're going morbid now.
No,
I would be hating to lie on that bed, right? And and I'm basically being given an hour, 2 hours to live, and looking back and regretting my life.
Oh, totally.
I would hate that.
Yeah.
And I want everybody who works for the power within, everybody across the world, actually, it's one of our built into our vision, is everybody has the potential. Everybody has the potential to actually do whatever it is they want in life. And not everybody wants to be managers or leaders or business owners, but whatever that is, go get it.
What's amazing,
go get it.
I've heard from so many people, Steve, you work quite long hours, you're quite committed and all the rest of it. And when you get to the end, on your last breath, you're never going to turn around and say, I wish I worked more. To which I say, yes, I will. Because my work makes the world a better place. It's my purpose. It's my vision. Of course I want to have worked more. Now, don't get me wrong. Would I have rather spent time with, my wife and my family and my dog and my animals and being outside and everything? Of course I would. But do I want to work more? Yes. It frustrates me there's only 12 hours in a day. 12 hours in a work, well, not 12 hours in a work day, but generally in my work day, there's around and about 12 hours. I'm the same,
there's about 12 hours, yeah. We'll get to that in a minute as well.
Well, if you do what everyone else does, if you conform to this 9 to 5, Monday to Friday mentality, then you will be average and you will be on the curve, and the curve measures mediocrity.
Yes.
And who the hell wants to live as a mediocre professional?
100%.
So I am off the curve, and that's what we do with our people as well. We hire off the curve. But you said some really interesting things there, and the authenticity is so important for us. It's one of the lessons that we teach in our courses, but one of the big philosophies that we have in the company as well. And it's not so much applicable, what I'm about to say, to the company, but certainly with the clients, that we'll have clients come along to us and say, I need to be this certain way, and I need people to like me, and I need this and I need that. And they're sometimes shocked when I turn around and say, no, you don't. So leadership and management is not a popularity contest.
As a hell.
Now, it's good to lead in a friendly manner, but I'll tell you right now, it's really difficult to lead friends. So
Absolutely.
for you to be authentic and not be exhausted, you need to be yourself, but you need to be authentically and consistently yourself. Now, pardon my language here, but what I say to them is, if you're a prick, be a prick, but be an authentic and consistent prick, so your people know what to expect. And you need the credibility behind you in order to carry off being a prick. But if you're a credible, consistent and authentic prick, that is a fantastic leader. You hear the stories about Alex Ferguson, you hear the stories about Churchill, you hear the stories about all these big leaders. None of them would have been our best friends.
No, but they cared.
But they cared. They did
They
care.
absolutely, when you hear that Alex Ferguson story, I'm a massive hero of his leadership style. It's a bit brutal, right? It's a bit brutal, but he cared. He knew about your granny, your mother, your sister, your brother.
Yeah.
He cared. He actually cared about every single player, but he also cared about the team. He also cared about the team, and that's why you were never too big for it. Whether it was Man United or Aberdeen, you were never too big for the team.
As I said
and
earlier,
I loved that authenticity was brilliant.
It's brilliant. Integrity HSE is bigger than us all.
Yeah.
It's got a purpose to change the world for a better place. That's bigger than me. That's bigger than anyone in the organisation. We collectively make something incredible. A group is always brighter than an individual. It doesn't matter who the individual is. And that's what I take care of as a leader. I take care of that bigger vision. I tell people where we're going, and hopefully we positively influence the world. But in terms of caring, I think it's a really interesting topic, and I've crossed swords with quite a few senior leaders about this, and I agree completely with the caring aspect. But I remember I read another article. I'm a fiend for information. I love it. Now,
Guilty as charged. Learning is one of our core values.
Oh, totally. Now, it needs to go through a filter, because an awful lot of what you get, especially on social media, is absolute crap.
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense, isn't it?
Let's bring that up then. Let's talk about Simon Sinek is always one that I like talking about, because Simon publishes some real quality stuff, but he publishes some other stuff that you could say is clickbait nonsense.
Yes.
So, for example, invest everything you have in your people, and your people will give it back. Now, that sounds wonderful.
Yes.
However, in the real world, doesn't work. You have studies out there that say 35% of an average workforce is engaged, 50% is disengaged, and 15% are toxic.
Yep.
If you follow Simon Sinek and you invest everything in the 35%, you'll get it back. But the 65% will generally see your niceness as a weakness and a vulnerability, and will take the piss.
Yes.
So, in terms of the likes of speak to people the way I'd like to be spoken to, which is a wonderful cliche that's out there. Well, yeah, but there's context to that. If you're sitting in my business,
context to everything.
Yeah, if you're sitting in my business and you're one of the 15% toxic people, then I tell you what, I'm going to speak to you in one way, and it's going to be authentic, it's going to be raw, it's going to be consistent, and you might not like it. If you're one of the 35%, I'm going to speak to you in a different way. Yeah. Again, authentically, Steve, but in a different way.
Yes.
I'm not going to.
That's real leadership, though, Steve. I think that's real leadership.
Yeah.
We're no people who, whether you're a business owner or you're a leader within an organisation or you're setting up a business, we're not there to be liked.
No.
Right. We're not there to be liked. We're not there to be friends with everybody.
It's not a popularity contest.
No.
You move people from A to B.
Yes. What I always think in leadership is this. I want people to be better tomorrow than they are today.
Yeah.
Right, and it's my job to give them the space and the surroundings and the role to allow that to happen.
Yep.
I clearly let them know what the vision and the values are. They're hired for a specific reason and purpose, and then they're empowered.
Yeah.
And if you don't do what you say you're going to do, I'm not going to have a nice conversation. I'm going to have a conversation but we've already spoke about this. We talked about this offline. I'm a really good guy, right? I consider myself to be a really nice person, and I'm loving and I'm caring, and I would give you anything. If any one of my employees came to me tomorrow and said, James, I'm in trouble, I need 10 grand or 15 grand, I'll probably say, what's it for? And if it's not, and I would say they're the money. Absolutely no question. I would support them if they were in trouble.
Yeah.
But piss me off. Take it, to abuse that kindness. No. The old James comes back out.
Exactly, yeah. And I think we're an awful lot very, very similar in that. And I sometimes compare it down to an employment contract and a psychological contract. Now, I've been told, I don't know how many times in my career, that if you ever actually have to examine a contract between you and a client, the relationship's failed and generally it's over. You might as well just tear it up and forget about it.
Absolutely.
So employment contracts are one thing. And I do pay attention to them, and the company lawyer would say I don't pay enough attention to them, but what I pay more attention to is a psychological contract. The contract that I have when I walk through the door every morning and look at the people that work in the business with this higher purpose, and I look at them and they look at me, and they know when they look at me that Steve will walk through fire for me. But there is a price for that loyalty.
Yes.
And the price for that loyalty is I walk my talk, I join them on the vision, and I do all the rest of it. And don't get me wrong, what we don't do is we do not hire little Steves or little Darryls or little Jens or little Brandons or little Jills or little Robs, or, we don't do that. What we do is we hire complete individuals. So if you had a Venn diagram of our organization just now, you'd have the circles that overlap a very small amount, and the overlap would be the vision, the values, etc. But generally, we have a huge different pool of personalities there, which comes down to incredibly interesting, conversations about different perspectives coming in. But we go in the same direction. Everything is always talked about with respect and integrity. And we always think we'll batter it out in the room here so we don't have to battle it out in the marketplace. Because by the time we take anything to market, it has been red teamed and it has been pen tested and it has been beaten up as much as we possibly can. So that when I go to a client and say, tell me about your challenges, and they tell me, and I say, well, we've got something, it's not off the shelf, we tailor it to you, but here's the solution. I need to have 100% confidence the solution I'm giving them is going to result in a better world for them. It's going to make their working world safer, healthier, more sustainable. It's going to solve their challenges. But interestingly enough as well, we only work with certain types of clients. So I've walked away from about 100 grand of EBITDA profit in the last 2 years because the clients, I know, and you know how difficult that is for a startup.
Very difficult for a startup, you're right, it is.
Because the client has not met our minimum expectations.
Yes.
And it is pretty terrifying. Not to speak to a client, I don't mind that. Brutal honesty is something I'm gifted with. I don't mind it. It's like when I used to do audits and I would sit down in the final closing meeting and people would say, be nice. And I'd be like, well, I am being nice, but if you didn't want to have these findings, then be better. So here's the fine. So brutal honesty is very easy for me.
I love it. Because I'm a straight talker. I love this. I'm a straight talker. And what you see is what you get.
Oh, I tell you what, in the past, I've tried to do other things. I've tried not to be a straight talker. And good God, it's exhausting.
I can't do it.
It's like you've got the little voice inside that says, just give me straight.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can be, as I said to you, I can be nice, I can do all those things. But if you ask me a question, you ask me an opinion, I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to answer the question authentically.
Authentically, you'll love this. So when I started the organisation, if you asked all the people that had worked with me in the past, and I'm talking about working with, as in worked for me and clients and everything like that, there's probably about 70% of them would have said, Steve is a great guy, he's really wonderful, and he's a lovely person. 30% of them would have said, Steve is an absolute bastard.
He's an arsehole.
Oh my God, isn't he just? But 100% of them would have said, he's honest, he really knows what he's talking about, he puts a good shift in. And when I started the company, and I didn't know what I was doing marketing-wise, so I just reached out to
Nobody
people.
Nobody ever does.
No, you're throwing the dice, aren't you?
Absolutely.
So you reach out to that marketplace and you say, look what I've done, do you want to come and join the party? And the 70% that really liked me, hardly anyone came. The 30% that didn't like me were knocking on my door saying, I remember what it was like sitting across the table. I want you on my team.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, I don't believe nice guys finish second, but it was almost like that that
absolutely.
instance, in that, those that thought I was a bit of a bastard were the ones that really wanted to work with me. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Really
but I it's gone back to what we talked about. I think when we say, like, I have a big belief around servant leadership, right? So helping enough people get what they want. Yeah. If I help enough people get what they want, they'll in turn reciprocate and help me get what I want. And that's whether it's staff, customers or clients. An example, any one of my customers, right, get my number and they can phone me, and this is whether it's right or wrong, there'll have probably people listening going, oh, that's crazy. If they phone me at 9 o'clock at night and they've got a problem, even if it's a legal issue, and we don't deal with legal, I'll go on the phone to my lawyer and say, right, I've got a client, here's the problems, what would you suggest we do? And they'll either say, right, what to do is tell them to do this, or I'll speak to them online. Because I want my clients to feel like I'm part of their business, right? We're not a subcontractor. We're part of their business. We're part of their team.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's how I built the Power Within. And it's about helping as many people as I possibly can get what they want, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then in turn, that reciprocation. I mean, our repeat clients, we're up about between 60 and 70% of every client becomes a repeat client. Yeah. So the lifetime value is pretty high.
That's great. And we see ourselves as the same as well. Yeah. I would hate for anyone to say, oh, we subcontract that to Integrity HSE. So we do incredible things in security, safety, health, environment. And the way that we are seen by our clients and the way that we want to be seen by our clients is as facilitators and supporters so that they can achieve their objectives.
Absolutely.
We're not an outside force that comes in every now and again. We're embedded within their organisation. And just like you, I want, if my client hits a bump in the road, and even if it's not related to the service that we're offering, I want them to sit there and say, wonder what Steve would think about that. I'll give him a call.
Absolutely.
Wonder what Darryl would think about that. I'll give him a call. Because we are facilitators for their success. We're not, and especially in terms of HSE and QHSE, there's so many people out there that when you say QHSE, they sit there and think, oh, it's a go slow. It is. And it's not. Actually, the way that we do it, we take clients towards technical limit. So we take them towards the very best of their procedures, the very best of their people, the very best of their processes. And ultimately what we want to do is make things more efficient for them with due respect to their risk appetite and risk acceptance.
Yep.
But we want them to go as fast as they can possibly go and with the best quality and the best all the rest of it. So yeah, that facilitation piece is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got our HR company. We use a company called Best HR in Glasgow.
Yeah.
I don't talk about them. I talk like they're part of the business. I call them our HR.
Yeah.
And my accountant, we've got an incredible accountant. We don't have an accountant that does our books end of the year. I have an accountant that meets us all the time throughout the year and constantly advising us. And that was, by the way, I interviewed accountancy companies because I thought, I don't want an accountant who comes at the end of the year and says, oh, this is how much you owe. No.
Yeah.
Because that's after the fact.
Totally.
I want to know.
Yeah.
And I talk about the people, I mean, you say the word, the subcontractor, our external clients as internal employees. I don't, I've got a relationship with them. Do you know, I can call them up anytime.
Yeah.
And I have any time and say, I've got a problem, how do I fix it? And they'll be like, right, give me half an hour and I'll drop you an email. Because that's how we work. And I just find it just, that passion. I love to work with people that are like me. You know, that way. Totally. I love to work with people like me.
So I don't want to sound like something that's not here, but I practice gratefulness quite a lot.
Yep.
I like to take a step back and think, wow, I mean, I've driven over to Glasgow today in a pretty nice car. I've enjoyed the sunshine. I'm free. Nobody's trying to persecute me. I can pick up my phone and phone my dad. Tomorrow I might not be able to do that.
Yes.
So good God, pick up the phone today and phone your dad, because when he's not there, and I practice that an awful lot, and I love where the business is just now in terms of when the people come inside, and because this year we are going to have pretty rapid growth. We're adding a couple of business streams, and it's going to go from where we are.
You bought a business, didn't you? You bought over another business.
We
I
acquired
remember
the
seeing
business
that
last year.
Yes.
And we did that because we wanted to target one person in particular, who's a guy called Rob Diver, who is just, first of all, the nicest guy you'll ever meet, but also a professional that is on the world stage, just excellent at what he does. So he has a very successful police career, a very successful military career, and now he's a subject matter expert for NATO for the energy industry. So we were able to bring that down and harness that skill. It involves him working with NATO every now and again and all the rest of it, but it's typically Integrity HSE. When we walk into a room and someone turns around and says, "What do you do on security?" And we're like, "Well, here's Rob, in my opinion, the best in the world at what he does. Take a seat." And then Rob's got another lady called Gillian Thompson on his team. She was 7 years with the police. She was the oil and gas liaison officer for a while. Then she spent 10 years as an APITO-approved major emergency management instructor. Huge smile.
I'm connected with her on LinkedIn, I believe.
Oh, she's lovely. Next time you're over in Aberdeen, I'm really looking forward to introducing you. And she's just like Rob. She walks into a room with a smile and with an appetite to help bring solutions to the table and not problems. And you just can't work with better professionals.
Absolutely.
They're brilliant. But going back to the team there, when I said, we're going to be expanding this year and we're going to potentially lose it, and what I'm about to describe, and this is why I'm so grateful, what we have in the organisation just now is basically, we've just got a really cool gang.
Yeah, love it.
We don't have
way to describe
a company.
your team,
We don't have so we've got a really cool gang right now that everybody knows everything about each other. I don't answer to anyone except for the people that work for the business. That is it. So, we get called in by incredible super majors. And you'd be lucky to work for us. Goodbye. Yeah. I'm leaving. I don't answer to anyone except for Darryl and the team.
Yeah.
That's the only one. And we're just really close as this gang. And I know one day we're going to lose that. And I'm so grateful for it just now.
Yep.
I never want to lose it, but I know we will one day. It's just natural progression. But I think that's really important as well. That, like you say, that relational face-to-face.
Oh, absolutely.
Answering and self-policing to each other.
Absolutely. It's always, so the early years, you're kind of finding your feet. For me, in the early years, you're finding your feet. And we're now, the business, we're now in a position where we're like you. So our business is growing every single year, doubling, turning every year. And so you have some pinch me moments that you're like, wow. I mean, this is happening fast. And our revenue for the next 12 months is doubling again for last year.
Brilliant.
And with that comes new people. And you're always worried, what if I lose... we call it the family business, right? We call it, because it's me, my wife, my daughter, right? So there's 3 family members in the business. My daughter is in marketing.
Brilliant.
My wife is our COO, so she's the Chief Operating Officer. She literally manages the company. I mean, she manages the company. I'm the face and the visionary, but the day-to-day operations, probably like your operation, she runs a company. I mean, that's it. She runs the company. And you're always worried that, what if I lose that? What if we grow too fast, or we bring people in and they're maybe no good fit because we're trying to rush it because we can see the growth and we're like, we need to do this, we need to do that. I still have that worry.
I do as well, but I always look back to, I was offshore for years, and I really loved working offshore because I really loved solving problems. So I used to bounce from rig to rig to rig. And when I was on a rig for a little while, I'd sit there and think, this is the best rig in the world. The people here are amazing. The next rig's not going to be as good as this. And I went to the next rig and it was just as good, if not better. And I went to the next rig, it was just as good, if not better. So as much as I'm really grateful for what I have just now, I'm ridiculously excited about the future, because it doesn't really matter where you put me. I will tend to make it, certainly within my own head, a really great place to be. So I know for a fact, a year from today, I might not be able to say that we have this incredibly family-orientated atmosphere, but what I will do is I'll wax lyrical to you about another incredibly positive side of the business. In a year's time, even if we lose the family aspect, which we're probably going to eventually, well, we definitely will eventually, what we will be doing is it'll be a sign of growth, which means we're helping even more people be safer, healthier, more sustainable.
The byproduct is the growth, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the 1st of April just passed there, we had a tragic helicopter accident in the North Sea back in 2009. That's what we combat. So yeah, will I sacrifice the knowing everyone and being really tight-knit with the team, knowing that my organisation is driving down the risk of a repeat of tragic accidents? I'll take that every day of the week.
All day long.
Yeah, it's all good.
Tick. All day long.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right, I want to go back to the early years.
Oh, okay.
So let's talk, is because you've got a really, this is what I love about you, Steve, is you've got a very optimistic outlook in life, right?
Yeah,
very optimistic outlook in life. Have you always been like that, or is that something that you've built over the years, or what makes Steve?
I don't think it's been like that throughout my life. I've always had a belief in myself that I can carry on, that I can do things a little bit more than other people. You know what? I might not be technically as talented as somebody else. Yeah. Somebody may have a bigger IQ than me. Somebody may have a bigger EQ than me. Although I pride myself on my EQ, but anybody that gets arrogant or sits in their laurels and says, you know what, my EQ is fantastic, all they're doing is they're opening themselves up to be vulnerable and a victim. So you stay frosty, you stay developing yourself. I've always had the belief that overall, I'm self-aware enough to be able to take myself that step further, because what nobody can control and what is completely down to me is my work ethic and my perspective. And I am 100% dominating those two perspectives. Yeah. And with my work ethic and with my perspective, there's not much you can knock me down on. It's
always been like that, though. How is that developed? But by the way, the reason I'm asking is because people ask me, and I always say, well, I wasn't always as confident, but I always had self-belief. Always.
Yeah.
And if I didn't know, I'll learn.
I think it went through. You know, you take knocks, don't you, throughout your life? So it's one of the things that we have as
I've
a
had
hiring.
A few knocks.
Yeah, you don't get where you are without them. You know, and it's one of the hiring philosophies that we have for Integrity HSE, that generally we want people who have had to walk the hard yards before they come into the organisation, because they're going to be involved intimately with our clients during some very, very challenging times.
Yeah.
And I want to give my clients people that I know stand up and fight. And if they don't stand up and fight, I want to be able to tell where that barrier is. And you know what? If that barrier is within a zone that's comfortable, then great. But if we're talking about something like, you know, crisis management, business continuity management, security, the likes of a Rob Diver, and something that his department does, it does not matter what you do to Rob Diver. He will continue to stand up and move forward in the direction of our values, because we're totally aligned. And he only does that because he has walked the hardest yards.
Yes.
And it's really quite disappointing what I hear sometimes about people when they turn around and say, you know, there's a big philosophy, especially on you know, sometimes people's LinkedIn feeds are like social cesspits.
I know.
And they turn around and say, oh, it's tough. Well, calm down. Take care of yourself. Don't worry. No, worry. It is tough. That's great. You're learning.
Yes.
You need to have some. You need to. Yeah, exactly. But grit is not. You know, people say nature, nurture, and you know what? If you have it, nature, that's fantastic. But
very small percent of who we are.
Yeah, to get where you are, that's all nurture. That's all life. That's all.
Absolutely.
That's all standing back up. So you know, if you turned around to me and said, you know, give me one example of a really tough part of your career that you did. In 2019, I had somebody that worked for me that committed suicide in an oil rig. So every single day, my guys would phone me and they'd give me an operations debrief. And I'm a really easy guy to work for as long as you know how to work for me. And I'm very open with how to work for me. We were dealing with major accident hazards, so I was very black and white. This person phoned me, gave me an operations brief, and then we had 5 minutes at the end of the call where we always just let loose and complained and laughed and cried and shoot the shit, yeah. So at the end of that, he said, thanks very much, Steve. I'll speak to you soon. I said, yeah, thanks very much. I put down the phone, went to bed. He put down the phone, got his coveralls on, went outside and took his own life. Now, he left 2 suicide notes in his cabin, one for his wife and one for me. So the police obviously came out, took the suicide notes, had a look at the suicide notes, presumably to count out foul play, etc. Sent the suicide note for his wife to his wife, and sent the suicide note for me to me. Now, I opened this suicide note and read it, and there was an awful lot of language within that suicide note that was personal between me and him.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody else read that suicide note, they wouldn't understand.
Yep.
And the suicide note actually said, pass this on to my wife, feel free to pass this on to my wife. I couldn't pass that note on to the wife without talking her through it. So I invited her and their 2 daughters down to a very nice surrounding where we were that I could control completely. And I sat with them and read out their father's suicide note and explained to them exactly what I thought the interpretation of his words were. Mm-hmm. And then I gave them a copy of it. Now,
wow.
What anyone else, what a lot of people, not what anyone else, that's very arrogant of me and that's not me, but the easy way out of that would be to copy the suicide note and pass it to his wife and say, there's Don's suicide note. Yeah. But that wasn't values. That wasn't the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to be asked questions by his daughters who are sobbing, who are missing their father, saying, what did Dad mean when he said this? And what happened when he said this? And for me to explain to them. And I then stayed in touch with the family for a while afterwards. But it's events like that that take your baseline above other people's baselines.
Absolutely.
So then people look at you and say, you're not normal. And you sit there and say, no, I'm not, because my baseline's different from yours because of my experience. And because,
absolutely.
And you said earlier on about good things and bad things and the way that they shape people. I've learned more from my anti-mentors than I ever will from my mentors. Yes. And that's where some of the values came from as well. Working with absolute idiots that have sat there and thought, I am never ever going to be like that. Yeah. I am going to be different. Rather than working with some of the absolute superstars I've worked with, it's the anti-mentors. And as unfortunate as it might be to say, you're more of a product of your poor time in life, of your tough times in life than you ever will be from your. So you know what? When someone comes to me and says, I'm really struggling and I'm having a terrible time and I'm doing this, I look at them. And yeah, exactly. I'd say, congratulations, man. It's
you're
all
learning.
Part of the journey. Yeah, one day you're going to turn into a grey, bald guy like me, but you're going to be so resilient.
Listen, I wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Success and Excuses.
Absolutely brilliant.
I wrote a book about that story because a lot of people, I get this a lot, right? Because I love what I do, right? People say, you're such a natural speaker and you're such a naturalist. And I'm like, you any idea how hard I've had to work to be this person? Are you any idea the shit that I've had to go through to become this person? Yeah. And by the way, I want to go back to something you said there. We talk about what was the word you used? No negative mentors. What was the word? Anti-mentors.
Yeah.
I remember, right, my first time in Saudi.
Yeah.
I moved to Saudi. I was working in Oman and they offered me a new position as country manager in Saudi. I'd never managed a P&L before. I'd never managed people, but I'd never managed a P&L. I'd never ran a business before. So they moved me into Saudi and says, look, we use subcontractors for most of this, but this particular product line's business. Yeah. We're giving away hundreds of millions of pounds. We need to fix it. Go in, James, because I was a very technical guy when I was younger, right? And not just was a very technical, very, very something what you said. I was always able to look forward, to sit down and actually have a conversation with the client or the customer and really understand what was the need, not what was the want. What was the real need? And I was really good at that.
And sometimes the customer doesn't actually realise what their needs are. They need you to be able to sit there and say, what do you think your needs are? And they say one thing, and then you actually switch it. It's if you ask me, Steve, what do you want for lunch? I'm going to tell you cheeseburgers all day long. If you ask my doctor, what does he need for lunch? It's going to be clean white meats and salad. Yeah. So when the client says cheeseburgers, it's up to you to say,
clean white meat.
Where's the clean white meat and salad? That's what you need.
Anyway, back to the anti-mentor.
Yeah.
I wouldn't name the guy, but I had a South American manager, and I remember going to him. I was doing it was October, right? And I just moved into the role, I think maybe the April, May-ish time. So I was only a few months in the role, and it was October planning.
Yeah.
Do all the planning. So we're doing our plan, gap analysis, and our plan for the following 12 months and blah, blah, which you present in November and it gets approved in December and that's your plan for the following year.
Yeah.
So I remember that I don't understand this. And I remember going to him and saying, look, I've never done this before. Can you help me? And he turned to me and basically, well, you're hired to do it. And I thought, you fucking bastard, excuse the language. I thought, you arrogant arsehole. I was like, I can't believe people carry on like that. Like, I was shocked.
Yeah.
Absolutely shocked. I thought I'd never treat anybody like that. So I went to my accountant and I sat my accountant and says, you need to tell me what all this stuff means. I says, I will never go into another meeting again and no understand this stuff. And I would spend, me and the accountant after work would spend night after night after night sitting. He would be teaching me about gap analysis and revenue recognition and all the things that I really needed to understand to build the plan, right? So I remember standing up at the plan, right, and we had a horrible contract with Aramco and we were losing money. And I remember standing up at my very first presentation for the P&L for the following year, and I had Khaled New on the column with the CEO of Baker Hughes. Khaled New was the Vice President of Middle East and Africa, and with CEO and CFO and all these were on the call. So Saudi was presenting. Yeah. So all the product lines go up and present. It was my time to go up and present. So I went up and I talked about, revenue and gap analysis and profits and losses and I remember them turning around and saying to me, I had in there that I was going to change the contract to take it from a negative to a positive. And I remember Khaled New saying to me, James, Khaled is Saudi, from Saudi, he's originally a Saudi national. And I remember saying to me, he says, James, I've known Aramco for the best part of 30, 40 years. He says, they've never changed their contract. You're pissing against the wind. Now, I could imagine they've seen this wee boy from Glasgow, the Glasgow accent, totally authentic, right? I don't talk fancy. Yeah. I tell you what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and this is it. And I remember him saying, this won't happen, that won't happen, you're pissing against the wind. And he says to me, James, that won't happen. And I said, fair enough, fine, great comment. I says, I will make it happen. And he says, but what's your backup plan? I says, I don't need a backup plan. I will make this happen. Mm-hmm. Within I actually went to my VP and says, right, I need help here. I set up a meeting with Aramco. I went into Aramco and I had all the head people, all the head of their contract, and I sat down and I basically turned around and said, look, and it was all about revenue recognition. So in the contract it said that we can't recognise revenue, or the law is we can't recognise revenue until things past ownership has passed. So, but in the contract it says the ownership, Aramco won't take ownership of our equipment until it's up and running and working. Yeah. Well, we were spending hundreds of millions of pounds getting this equipment, buying it, getting it all ready, shipping it offshore, fixing it in place, and it was sitting for 12, 18 months because they weren't ready to produce any oil. So we couldn't commission it. And I sat down and I just said to the Saudis, look, I'm not here to pull the wool out of your eyes. I'm not asking for anything that we're not due. What I'm asking is, imagine that was your business. I'm running millions of pounds at a loss every single month because I can't recognise revenue and it's got to stay in my book. And it's making my businesses, I'm going to end up losing my job or walking away. That's our two options. And they turn around and go, you know what, that actually isn't fair. And they changed the contract. And they allowed us to recognise revenue at delivery. Yep. We went from, say, the £120 million loss, literally overnight, we were sitting, £600 million business.
That's what your authenticity and our authenticity brings, though, isn't it? When you're able to be that open and transparent, it builds trust.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you have trust, that's what we build with clients. As soon as you have that mutual trust, then you're working together. You're working for each other.
Arabs love to feel trust, don't they? That's what I mean. I spent a long time in the Middle East. I'm actually married to an Arab, originally from Yemen, and because I don't know if it's a cultural thing. There's always this kind of they trying to pull one over my eyes. So building trust, I found, changed the game in my favour. When I built trust, I would learn the language, I would talk to them in Arabic, I would welcome them in Arabic. Just little things to show that I actually care.
Yeah.
changed the game.
Absolutely. I want to nip back to resilience a little bit, because talking about trust and a couple of other aspects, it reminds me of a little story that I tell. So it's called the Stockdale Principle.
Right.
I don't know if you've heard of the Stockdale Principle. It's wonderful. So the highest ranking American officer that was taken as a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War was called Admiral Stockdale. Admiral, I want to say Jim Stockdale, pretty sure it was. Anyway, he was kept in the Hanoi Hilton. You know, it's a pretty rough place to be. And he came out of it, physically he was like a bag of bones, but mentally he was pretty fit. And Jim Collins, the same guy that wrote From Good to Great and all the rest of it.
Love Good to Great. Loved it.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Brilliant book. One of my favourite books, by the way.
It's a game changer.
Love it.
It's a shifter. So Collins heard about Stockdale and said, I need to interview that guy. So, you know, in terms of resilience, this is an incredible story. So he sat down with him and said, Admiral Stockdale, how did you do it? So give me some of your observations from the camp. So, for example, who died first? And he said, pessimists died first. And they were just miserable buggers, and they talked themselves into the grave, basically. He said it in an awful lot more respectful tone, and I do respect those who passed, so you know what I mean. And he said, who died next? And he said, the optimists would die next, and they'd always die of a broken heart. So they'd always sit there and say, I'll be out by Christmas, then they weren't. I'll be out by New Year, and then they weren't. I'll be out by Easter, then they weren't. I'll be out by, then they weren't. And they died of a broken heart. And Jim Collins turned around and said, what happened with you? And he said, I had the unwavering belief that it'll be okay in the end, but I also had the courage to face up to the brutality of the circumstances at the time. And that's what Stockdale did, and that's the Stockdale principle of having the belief that everything will be okay in the end, the belief in yourself, the same way that we talked about earlier, but also the courage to square up to the circumstances at the time in exactly the same way as you just did when you just described when you were in Saudi. You had the belief that it was going to be okay, you had the courage to stand up to it at the time, and you ended up making a game-changing contract out of it. And the Stockdale principle is so, so important. You know, we have people, you know, in the industry just now that sell optimism. And I sit down with them and say, you're not really selling optimism, you're selling false promises, and just stop it. And then you have other people who are pessimists, and I have to be very careful about the people I spend time with, because it doesn't matter how strong you are to a degree a product of your surroundings.
100%.
If I surround myself with negative people, then it's going to take away from my burning passion and the little volcano that I have inside me that just wants to make the world a better place. And it's more important for me to achieve that vision than it is for me to try and turn one of those toxic 15%ers into something else. And at the end of the day, I don't really want to turn people from one thing to another. I just want to give them the ability to reach their potential. So, the keeping those negative people away and just, you know, having that.
But before we wrap up, I want to talk about that, right? So in my world, right, I very rarely see negativity, right, because I don't look for it. Right? I don't look for it. So I very rarely ever see negativity, because I'm a big believer in where your focus is, you get more of.
Yeah.
Do you experience that? Like I just don't see most of the time negativity, because I don't live in that world.
I see what other people perceive as being negative. I just don't see it as being negative. So, the likes of a story from another relatively tough time. It was 2000. COVID had just hit. Anyway, and I was in the house with my partner, and I developed a cough, and I had a cold just before the cough. So anyway, the cough stayed with me for about 3 weeks. So my partner said, "You're going to need to speak to a doctor." It was all telephone appointments at that time. So I said, okay, no problem. So I phoned the GP practice and said, look, I've got a cough. And I went through to a doctor, and the doctor said, you know, put me through a triage kind of decision tree. How old are you? Do you know where it came from? And the doctor basically turned around and said, Steve, you had a cold, now you've got a cough. It's all good. Don't worry about it. If it hasn't gone in 3 weeks' time, give me a call back. 3 weeks went past, gave him a call back. Cough's still there. Same thing. Totally understandable. In 3 weeks' time, give me a call back if it's still there. Called him back in 3 weeks and said it's still here. And he said, right, okay, now we need you to come in and I need to have a look at you. So I said, okay, no problem at all. So I ended up going into the surgery, which during COVID times was a unique experience in itself, and sat down with a doctor, a relatively young doctor. and started talking about my symptoms and giving him a complete landscape. And I'm very much a believer, the more information I can give him, the better decision he can make. So he was getting everything. And his whole persona started to change. And he was a younger fella, like I say. So we've talked earlier about a little bit about age. Competence is the result of a number of things, but it's also knowledge, experience, and skill.
Absolutely.
And you can't get experience without time, and time is intimately linked to age. So when people say I'm young, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm incompetent. In certain aspects, unfortunately, yes, it does. Because you just haven't been alive enough to have that experience. So this doctor,
and our life's built on experience. Let's be honest.
Totally.
Who I am today is built on that experience.
Yeah, and sometimes you know what, you can't get to where you are. You can't perceive the world in the way that we perceive the world without wrinkles. It's just the way it is. So anyway,
got lots of them.
I'm there too. So we had, I had this young doctor, and he said, so it's one of two things. So the first thing it could be is acid reflux. So it's coming up from your stomach. Your voice box is built like a tank, top down, but from bottom up, it's relatively vulnerable. So that could be where your cough, and I had developed a hoarse voice at that point. And he said, but the symptoms match a rather aggressive form of cancer better than the acid reflux. So I said, okay, so let's talk about that. And he gave me some information. He said, source information for this is NHS website or phone the clinic. And you know you're in the trouble when the doctor says, phone the clinic and I'll always answer. Oh, okay. So anyway, so did that, went outside to the car, plugged up the NHS website, had a look at it. Only 5% of people survive over a year from the diagnosis of this particular type of cancer. So I thought, right, so I'm in a wee bit of trouble here. So I then attempted to become the most insured man in the world, phoning everyone. But because I'd had that initial doctor visit and I'd been told, it was tough to get. But I couldn't necessarily tell my partner at the time because she was going through something herself. My best friend had just lost his mother to cancer, and there was a number of things. So I thought, how can I burden other people with this information when there hasn't been any actual definitive testing? So I'll just keep it to myself just now. So the doctor rushed me through a chest x-ray, rushed me through a consultant, everything like that. So I went to the consultant after the chest x-ray. I went to the consultant about a month in. And it was an incredible month. And it was a month I wouldn't swap for the world. I saw the world in a different place and through different lenses during that month when I thought, chances are I'm going to be dead in a year. I'm probably going to be down in 6 months. So I saw my nephews. I've never loved my nephews so much. My mum had all that. Anyway, I got to the consultant's office a month later, and there was a nurse inside the room, and waiting in the oncology department, was like waiting in death's doorway because a lot of people had got the information and the news that I thought I was going to get. Sat down, and this consultant, as specialists do, breezed into the office like they were indestructible because they have to have that, that confidence. Anyway, I think it was the first time a consultant had ever been told to sit down, be quiet, do I have cancer? I just want to hear a yes or no. And he turned around and said, no. And I thought, wow. And at that point, the nurse handed me a tissue. And I looked at the tissue, and I'm fairly black and white in an awful lot. Don't get me wrong, there's ranges to my personality. I'm very emotional. There's other ranges where...
very black and white as well.
Yeah, very black and white. To the point that sometimes my wife says I'm dead inside. And in certain aspects I might be, but in other aspects I'm really not. But I got the tissue from the nurse, and I handed it back to the nurse and said, no, I got good news. And she kind of smiled. And I was speaking to the consultant, and I noticed the nurse dabbed her eyes with the tissue. And I turned around to her and said, what are you crying for? And she said, it's so rare that we get good news that it overwhelms me when we does.
Whoa.
And she was so used to giving bad news. She was so used to giving terminal news that she gets overcome by joy. I thought, wow, just absolutely wow. What
amazing.
An absolute superstar you are. So I'm totally living the story now, and I can't really remember why I started it, but it's all about that the experiences that we go through, from the cancer experience to the nurse to the everything. Again, it harps back to age, it harps back to experience, it harps back to everything.
Makes you the person you are today.
And it makes us,
Absolutely. Yeah. Before we close off, if you were giving anybody listening to this one piece of advice, what would that be and why?
That's a really, really, really good question. So It's answered in a couple of ways. One of my common phrases is that as long as you're not breaking a law or hurting anyone, crack on. Harps back to our conversation earlier about being authentic. If you are truly you, you find out who you are, you get comfortable with who you are, and you face life with values that basically boil down to, I'm not breaking a law and I'm not hurting anyone, and that is what's going to make you happy and give you a satisfied life. Don't be ashamed of who you are. Just own it and be yourself.
Oh my God.
Whether that involves you walking through George Square dressed as Big Bird or,
whatever floats your boat.
Just own it and own that smile and own your positive contribution to yourself, those around you. But as long as you're not breaking a law, as long as you're not hurting anyone, just own who you are and get comfortable with it.
Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. We could sit here all bloody day.
No doubt.
Listen, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
If anybody's trying to get a hold of you or website, or how does somebody get in contact? You think, I want to speak to this guy?
I've got a relatively speaking, I'm quite active on LinkedIn.
Yep.
So find me on LinkedIn. But what is way cooler than me is the company. And you'll find that www.integrityhse.com. And have a look at our website, have a look at our services, and just drop us a line and find out what we're up to, because we'd love to speak to you. Whether you become a client or not, genuinely, we'd love to speak to you and just find out, hopefully we can give you some hints and tips on how to make your working world a safer, healthier, more sustainable place.
Superb, and thank you so much.
Thank you.